So I'm Bob Jolly, I'm director of the Athenaeum. Pleased to see all of you here. Welcome to this penultimate presentation of the Vermont Humanities Council First Wednesday series. I do love that word. Tonight we have Haviland Smith, former CIA Chief of Counterintelligence, speaking on Islamic fundamentalism. And I will introduce him formally in just a minute. I just want to mention, I'll be brief, some programs that are coming up and our sponsors, because this doesn't happen without our sponsors. First and foremost, I'm scanning the crowd for the Adlers. They're not here. Adler and McCabe, PLLC, make this program possible. Without their support, it just doesn't happen here. So we're very grateful to Steve Adler and Daniel McCabe. Often Lisa Adler is here, so thanks to them very much. The Friends of the Athenaeum are the other supporter of this series here in the Athenaeum. If you buy a pie, if you make a pie, if you buy a book at Secondhand Prose, if you sell a book at Secondhand Prose, that support is coming to help us put this series on. This, the St Johnsbury Athenaeumm series sponsor, for the first time this year, is the St Johnsbury Academy, and we are very grateful to their support. The underwriter for this particular talk is the Vermont Council on World Affairs, and the last time we had a program sponsored by them, there was a person who did some introduction, but I guess there is not a person here. And the statewide sponsor is the Vermont Department of Libraries, through a grant from the IMLS, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, and I say this every time, and I mean it, our tax dollars at work, at least in a way that I'm totally in favor of, and the National Life Group. So without all of those sponsors, this series doesn't happen, so thanks to all of them very much. I'll quickly go through some events. First of all, I want to say throughout town, you will see poems in shop windows for the Poem Town event. St. Johnsbury is one of the participating cities. There's a poem in our inner window on the door. Throughout the town, if you are wandering the streets, Main Street, Eastern Ave, Railroad Street, you'll see poems in windows, and it's a pretty great series celebrating National Poetry Month this month. Next Wednesday, April 13th, we'll hold the next Arts and Culture event, and that is called Say What? Stories Out Loud. And so I'm hoping that in this crowd, this is a moth-like event, but we can't say moth-like because that's a trademark name, but it's just like that, but it's not the moth. Yours truly will be telling a story, so if you want to see nothing but me do that, you're welcome to come. But next Thursday, if you want to tell a story, please do. Every Wednesday at noon in April in the gallery, we have poetry readings. So from noon to 1, there is a featured poet, and then there's an open mic if you'd like to read poetry or hear it, every Wednesday at noon. On Wednesday, April 20th, the Vermont Historical Society will be here, and they will hold an update on their 70s project. The last time they were here, they were collecting stories from people who were here in the 70s, and now they're giving a report about how that project is coming together. That's it. To our speaker. Haviland Smith is a retired CIA station chief. He was educated at Dartmouth College and London University, majoring in Russian studies. He served during the Cold War in Prague, Berlin, Beirut, Tehran, Washington, and Langley, focusing on the recruitment and management of Soviet and Eastern European sources of intelligence. He also served as chief of the CIA's Counterterrorism staff and as an executive assistant to the director's office. Please welcome Haviland Smith.
Thank you. I thought I'd start by telling you that I was a Russian major. I didn't know anything about the Middle East. Prayed to God I'd never have to go there. Was befuddled by everything I saw. And then back in the 60s, I was home from tours in Prague and Berlin. And I was in an insignificant job, but my boss had a heart attack, and I moved up into his job, and then was welcomed at the divisional staff meetings. And at one of the divisional staff meetings, my division chief said, Dick Helms, the director, was just over in the White House, and the president is really upset that the CIA doesn't have more people in Vietnam. And so the director is going to have a draft to get people over to Vietnam. I will tell you here parenthetically that one of my classmates from Dartmouth, who was also a CIA officer, spent his tour in Vietnam, having been drafted to go there, helping a priest build a church. Not exactly what you'd call intelligence work, but that was the way the world was. So at any rate, he looked at me and he said, Hav, I'd like to have lunch with you today. And I said, okay. Bad news is not far off here. And so we went to lunch, and he said, if you get tapped in this draft, what are you going to do? And I said, I'm going to resign. My feelings about the war in Vietnam were well known at the time. They were not emotional, they were purely practical. I saw Vietnam as one of the primary impediments to Chinese expansion in East Asia, and the thought that we were killing them off didn't make any sense to me. So I said, no, I'll resign. And he said, you do that after, what was 15 years? And I said, yeah, I do that. He said, okay. He said, I'll be in touch with you later this afternoon. I said, all right, that's fine. And later that afternoon, he called me up to his office, and he said, I've got a job for you. And I said, well, thank you, sir. He said, I'd like you to go to Beirut. I thought, Beirut? Jesus, I've been avoiding that place, among many others, for all these years. And that's how I got to the Middle East. I went there to assess, develop, and recruit sources in the Soviet and East European communities there. I did not go to become an expert in Middle Eastern affairs, and never did. I had an interesting tour, and I will tell you, I got bitten. I couldn't help it. It is such a fascinating part of the world that I succumbed. And I began to read about it, and I began to talk about it, and we had all these wonderful Arabists in the embassy who could talk forever and loved to, and who could never understand why there was a CIA officer who specialized in Soviet operations in Beirut. What are you doing in Beirut? And then one night at a cocktail party, one of them came up to me and said, I've noticed that the Soviets are beginning to move into Egypt and that they're beginning to train the military. You have any feelings about that? I said, as a matter of fact, I do. So I became persona grata with my colleagues in the embassy. But it is an absorbing part of the world, and I hope that as I launch into this talk, you will come along with me and understand how complicated and maddening and frustrating it is. I mean, nothing makes any sense. I mean, for people like us, it's just so confounding. It just blows your mind. So anyway, the talk was supposed to be, oh dear, on what is it? Some extremism. Is it okay? Okay. I think it's supposed to be on Muslim fundamentalism. And the way that happens is that the person who runs this program gets in touch with you 9 months ahead of time and says, we want you to go to St. Albans and talk about something. What do you want to talk about? And my reaction to that always is I talk about something that's I give them a topic that's as flexible as I possibly can so that I can spin it off and go somewhere else and not get everybody all upset. Well, this one, I said, Ali, I don't really care what I talk about. Something flexible. She said, I'll pick something for you. Big mistake. So that's how we got Muslim fundamentalism. My spin-off tonight is going to be less the rudiments of Muslim fundamentalism and more the practical aspects of our dealings with the people who are represented in that group. So that's what I hope to be. My view is the view of a former intelligence officer. That means I see everybody in the world as a potential recruit. And so that's not in favor in the United States right now. We're not allowed, I understand we're not allowed to do that with our Muslims here in this country. But we'll get along with that. What I did was I dug around and I found some quotes that I want to read to you about Muslim fundamentalism. So here we go. Muslim fundamentalism is a movement of people who look back to earlier times, seek to return to the fundamentals of the region, and live the way the Prophet Muhammad and his companions lived 1,300 years ago. That's a fair description. Second, they favor a literal and originalist interpretation of the Quran and seek to eliminate what they perceive to be corrupting non-Islamic influences from every part of their lives. Think about that as a Muslim comes in contact with anybody from the West. And finally, Muslim fundamentalism is a set of strategies by which believers attempt to preserve their distinctive identity as a people or group by a selective retrieval of doctrines, beliefs, and practices from a sacred past. So you see that there is a group of people, or you understand that there is a group of people who really go back to the 8th century and really do want to return to the values that were espoused by Muhammad in his speaking and in the writings of his acolytes. So that's where we are. And it's against that background that I want to continue with this in terms of how it affects us, what there is about it that we can find useful, hopeful, and what there is about it that we find, or that at least that I find, not hopeful at all. First of all, let me say that this term fundamentalist is a bad term when you're talking about Muslims, because any believing Muslim is by his nature a fundamentalist if he believes in the basic tenets of Islam. But by definition he is. So what there is, besides the guys who are blowing themselves up and us with them, there are the Islamists, who I suppose the easiest way to put it is to say that they are second to the violent jihadis, a little bit more flexible in their interpretations of the literature of their religion, and probably considerably easier to deal with. We hear them referred to time and again as moderate Muslims, reasonable Muslims. I'm not so sure that any of that's true, but this is a separate group from the jihadis who are doing the violence to the West right now. And it's something to keep in mind. I want to talk to you a little bit about the Middle East. I don't want to overdo this, but it's important that you understand what it's like there, how people think there, what they, in a sense, what they're prepared to do, what freedoms are allowed them by the rigors of their religion, and what freedoms are allowed them by the realities of their past. So let's start with the past. The fact of the matter is that most of these countries in the Middle East are vestiges of Western imperialism. They were set up by the Western imperialist countries during the 19th and early 20th centuries for the purpose of benefiting those colonial powers, for the purpose of making money, for the purpose of having power. And don't forget that. What you see when you look at Iraq is a creation of the West. And with it go all the problems that are attendant on the countries that are there and the people who live there. Beyond that, they are wildly tribal, they are wildly sectarian, and wildly nationalistic. And sometimes you find all three of those conditions in one country. Sometimes you only find one. for example, on tribalism, I am a trout fisherman, having been raised on a trout farm here in Vermont, and a hunter. And one of my best friends when I was stationed in Prague was the Afghan First Secretary, Amin Etemadi, wonderful guy, who's also a fisherman and a hunter. And I said to him one day, I said, I don't know anything about Afghanistan. Tell me something about Afghanistan. He said, I'll explain to you what it was like for me to grow up there. Fine. He said, I grew up in a valley. The valley was 20 miles long, and from peak to peak on both sides of the valley was about 5 miles across. And we had a river that ran all the way down through it. And everybody in that valley, from the peaks on both sides to the headwaters of the river, everybody was from my tribe. The next valley over was another group, about the same amount of territory, about the same number of people, 5,000 people, something like that, from a different tribe. We hated their asses. I said, why did you hate them? We were in competition with them all the time. Everything was competition with us. And we had another tribe on the other side of us. He said, and that's what Afghanistan looks like. Now, if you take that as with any measure of belief, then think about how do you create a central government out of people like that? Well, the fact is you don't. Nor has anyone ever done it, unless you do it coercively. And we'll get to that more. Sectarianism. Iraq, Syria, Lebanon are all governed by sectarianism. They are governed by the fact that there are large portions of Shia in what are essentially Muslim countries. And attendant on that is the fact that the Shia and the Sunni just really don't like each other. And if you look at the history of Iraq over the last 10 years, 5 even, you'll see exactly what I mean. That country was run repressively by a horrid man who was a Sunni. And all of his generals were Sunnis, and all of the people who ran the country were Sunnis. And most of the population, more than half the population, was Shia. And they were treated like crap by the Sunnis. And so all of a sudden we got rid of the person who maintained order, Saddam Hussein. Okay, we got rid of him. And since then, that whole place has fallen apart. And now the Shia have taken over because they're the largest portion. I mean, I know Sunnis who really didn't believe that the Shias were the majority of the population of Iraq. Didn't believe it. Why are you doing this to us? Anyway, Lebanon's the same thing. Lebanon is further complicated by all these wild sects that they have down there. They have the Alawites from Syria. They have a lot of Christians, the Maronite Christians. They have a little bit of everything, and even though they have survived for a very long time with this mix, it's now pretty much out of hand, and they are really horribly divided. So the thought, and I used to think that there was something about the Lebanese that made them susceptible to the blandishments of democracy, of freedom, personal freedoms. I used to believe that. I must say, I don't think that their situation permits that to happen. They're too close to Israel. That's a terrible burden for them to bear. They're the jumping off place for a lot of activities that are anti-Israeli. They take beatings, military beatings from the Israelis all the time because Hezbollah is constantly blowing up Israeli checkpoints and odd and sod Israelis of note. So they never have any peace, and they're probably never going to have any peace as long as their world is set up the way it is right now. Nationalism. Look at Turkey and the Kurds. There's your problem right there. In a nutshell, it's easy to see. It's nice and tidy. Do you know that while in this recent Syrian issue that we've been dealing with here for the last few years, the Kurds have taken the opportunity to say they were bombing the ISIS, whereas in fact what they were really doing was bombing the Kurds, something that they know we don't think they ought to be doing. Yeah. And that's typical of that part of the world. And that's true in a lot of places. You know, you've got a mix of nationalities. You have Armenians, you have northern, oh God, I won't even try to go there. But there's a big mix of different nationalities, all of whom are scrabbling for their rightful place. They want enough power to be able to do what they want to do. And they're always in conflict with each other, constantly. I would say probably that not one nation in the Middle East is not touched by these three factors, or at least by at least one, in most cases by all three. Now what that does is it creates a quite extraordinary instability. It gives you a group of people who are wildly suspicious of central government. Why? Because their government has been local throughout most of their history, and because when they were put under central government by the Western colonial powers, it was all managed through repressive power. They were all told what they had to do. And in fact, probably in most places in the Middle East, you don't have order if you don't have repressive power, because they just don't respond to anything but that. I think, for example, right now with the negotiations that are going on on Syria, if you had the opportunity to read the Russian stake in all of this, what they want is a stable Syria. They want it to be stable, quiet, not in conflict all the time. And for that reason, they have very real reservations about dumping Assad in a hurry. As well they should. Because if you dump Assad in a hurry, Assad is the head of a minority government, a minority Alawite government that represents about 17% of the population of Syria. And they run it. And it's in its own way, it's analogous to Iraq before we got rid of Saddam Hussein. Now, if you get rid of Assad, what happens? Oh, Bob's your uncle. I tell you, Bob's your uncle. So, I think here my message is you have a population, or a group of populations, that are really cynical about central government. What you want him to run this country? What's in it for me? How am I going to survive? How am I and my people going to survive? That's the key when you talk to them about central government. Okay. Between somewhere around 1685 and 1815, the Western world went through what is known as the Enlightenment. And during that period, we were able to rationalize scientific realities, philosophical realities, a world of reality with the Bible. The Muslims have not had this. They have never had any kind of enlightenment. They have always been wildly negative about thoughts that didn't conform to their notion of the way the world needed to be. It really is discouraging, God. Even now, when states that are predominantly Muslim populations adopt laws along European lines, they're influenced by Islamic rules and the precepts of their legal system, the Sharia, to the extent that they are often in conflict with international precepts or concepts of democratic life. In other words, basically, the notions that we bring with us about democracy are very threatening to people who really believe in Islam. Now, Islam is a total system for life. I mean, it tells you anything you want to know. It tells grandmothers of pregnant women what to feed them. I mean, it goes down to the most nitty-gritty aspects of life. And as such, it's a compendium. If you are a believing Muslim, you don't have, all you have to do is stick with the Quran and the Sharia and the Hadith. Stick with those things and you'll be okay. You'll be on the right side of God. So we then, in effect, represent a threat to their beliefs in their own religions. So it's tough. It's tough. We have less in common with them than I can even come close to explaining. Their values are so totally different from ours. Totally different. They put together in 1990, I think, under the guidance of the Egyptians, a Declaration of Human Rights. It's called the Cairo Declaration. It flies in direct contradiction to the UN Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, to which most of the rest of the world subscribed. It does not protect religious freedom, or freedom of association, or freedom of the press, or rights, human rights, or equal protection under the law. These things are all simply not part of their belief structure and of the document which they all signed, saying that this was their Declaration on Human Rights. Totally different from what you and I see as the way the world might be, even though we can't always say that it is. And it further stipulates this doctrine that it's all reviewable under Sharia law. In other words, the whole thing can be tossed out the window if they say it doesn't conform to Sharia law. Okay. Let me say one quick thing about terrorism. We confuse, and I think you have to thank George W. Bush for this. When he declared war on terror, he created a sin, because there is no such thing as war on terror. But what it does is it puts into effect policies that are inappropriate to deal with the issues at hand, with the problems at hand. Let me give you an example. ISIS, or ISIL, what do you want to call them? They are not a terrorist organization. They are an insurgency. They are trying to wrest control of a large portion of 3 countries for a caliphate of their own. They have armies. They have structural government. They raise money. They sell things. They run things. They're a government, in effect. Now, as long as they're terrorists, we can deal with them. But if you label them for what they really are, insurgents, we have policy. And U.S. military policy says absolutely clearly that if you are dealing with an insurgency, you have to have 25 combat soldiers on the ground for every 1,000 people in the local population. Now, if that's too much for you to do in your head, let me tell you that means that in order to deal with the issue in Afghanistan, which was also an insurgency, we would have had 850,000 American troops on the ground. And that's our policy. That's not some crazy guy who doesn't like us. That's us. That's our military. Yeah. Same thing for Iraq, where we now have, God knows what we have, a civil war, I guess, a bunch of insurgencies going on. So think about that. Makes it a little bit tougher on us, because there's no way in the world that we are in a position to make those kinds of commitments. I mean, even if we thought it was the right thing to do and wanted to do it, politically it was an acceptable course of action here. We don't have the resources to do it. We don't even have 850,000 troops. And God knows we don't have the billions of dollars it would take to maintain them for any period of time in that part of the world. Oh dear. Okay. What do they want from us? What they want to do is gain allegiance of their own people. And they found that one of the best ways to do that is get the Westerners to put their troops on the ground on their turf. And the more troops we have on the ground in that part of the world which is contested by the jihadis, the more likely they are to have converts to their views. And in fact, that's what's happened. That's what's happening today in many places. Now it's moving more into North Africa than it is anywhere else, but the fact is, that's what they want. They want to be able to live without the intrusion of the Western world on their way of life. And they want to have control over their turf. That's really unreasonable, don't you think? And I'm no apologist for these guys. Okay. Basically, what we have done is given them pretty much everything that they want. If Osama bin Laden had been able to sit down and write out a list of goals that he had for 9/11, I think probably we would have fulfilled all of them. Now, that's a pretty cynical thing to say, but I really do believe that. He wanted to provoke us. He wanted to create situations in which his view of the world would become more acceptable to the Muslim people. He wanted to cause enough problems for America in America that we would start to crack down on Muslims here, as the Europeans have, and all of this applies to Europe as well, to Muslim populations in Europe. All absolutely cynical. If I don't know what I would do if I were a Belgian or a Frenchman or an Englishman, their problem is so much more severe than ours that it's absolutely terrifying. I don't know how you can control the kinds of terrorist movements that we're beginning to see. The self-starter, the guy who radicalizes himself on the internet, takes all of his guidance from guidance that's on, and it's there on the internet, tells him exactly what to do. And then, like the guy who parked the car in Times Square, goes out and tries to blow something up. I don't know how we deal with those guys. I really don't. And we have these policies in this country. I'm an intelligence officer. My job was, at its apex, my job was to recruit Soviet citizens who had access to significant intelligence. Significant intelligence was intelligence on the capabilities and intentions of the Soviet Union. Okay? In other words, what did they have with which they could hurt us, and what did they intend to do with it? The only way you get that is by getting inside the head of the people who are doing it. There's no other way. This technical collection is a bunch of crap. If you want that intelligence, you've got to get inside people's heads. And so if I were an intelligence officer, not a CIA officer, but an intelligence officer, working against the terrorist target here, Muslim terrorist target here in the United States, I wouldn't quite know what to do, because I've been told that I can't target those guys because they're Muslim. And yet, the only people who have the information that I want are in that group. And what I would like to do is I would like to get a number of sources in every major Muslim community that would have their noses in the air saying, what's going on here? Is there anything that my case officer, me, needs to know about the intentions of these people and what they're planning to do? Are they getting close to any kind of a dirty bomb? What is the nature of the weaponry that they're going to use against us? The same kinds of requirements that were placed on guys like me during the Cold War. Same thing, all over again. And that's the only way that I know that you can protect yourself against this kind of new terrorist, a self-starter, guy who signs on without telling anybody and then educates himself, radicalizes himself, and goes and does something that he thinks is useful. And we're told we can't do that. We can't run the kinds of operations that would protect us against, or would begin to protect us against people like that. That's tough. That's tough. We are, you see it all the time. The press, you could, if you're really cynical, really paranoid, you could say the press is in league with the jihadis. The press is doing everything it possibly can to keep us on edge all the time about the dirty terrorist threat to the United States. They're the one, and they're telling us, now we're not doing this to keep you on edge, but look what's going on here. And what they're doing is adding to the kind of climate that favors only the jihadis, only the terrorists. Doesn't favor anybody else. They are creating fear in the population. And they are diminishing our personal liberties. And if you don't feel that you've lost some of your personal liberties, I feel sorry for you, because I feel I've lost them all the time. Yeah. Okay. Now, where am I?
Could you elaborate what you mean? What personal liberties have we lost?
Well, I mean, let me ask you a question. Do you use a computer? Do you think anybody knows what you got on your computer? Huh? Yeah, probably. Goddamn right. Don't you think you have some constitutional right to privacy? Constitution says you do.
I don't have to use a computer.
How about the telephone? Okay, same thing. How about anything?
I have no idea what it is due to the Islam. I was speaking for all sorts of other reasons. Government likes to collect data for all sorts of reasons.
I've heard of these. I'm not boarding a plane.
Okay, look, let me get back to my maudlin view of the world here. We are, I believe, creating most of our problems. We are putting military into situations where they don't help us and do help the terrorists. We're running drones all over the Middle East and now into Africa. We're blowing up some really bad guys, and we're also blowing up the odd wedding party and the odd family reunion. We have our paramilitary guys in the Middle East And I noticed that the Pentagon yesterday said that they wanted to increase the number of paramilitary special ops troops that we have by a fairly significant factor. These people, they don't get done what they need to get done without hitting the press. They kill people. I'm not against killing these guys. These guys deserve more than anybody in the world to get killed. But when you kill them, and the result of that is that the organization that they run gets 100 more recruits out of what we consider to be moderate Islam, then where are we there? We're not getting anywhere. We're not moving forward. Okay. I know somebody's going to ask me, well, we know what you're against. What are you for? So I'm going to tell you. Haviland Smith's foreign policy imperatives. Okay. We need to avoid any activity that will make terrorism more acceptable to moderate Muslims. I think I've just outlined what fits into that. We need to stop nation building. The thought that we can go overseas and turn any Muslim country into a democracy is so laughable that, I mean, and you know, the U.S. government is full of people who know this and have always known it. And we persist in doing it anyway. It's a political imperative for us. Okay? We need to stop pushing democracy. We need to support the existing governments in the Middle East. Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Turkey, Pakistan, and the Gulf states in every way and as strongly as possible. We need to listen to what they have to say about what should be happening in the Middle East. Not what we have to say, what they have to say. Something we've never done. We have never listened to them. We need to strengthen our relationship with all those local governments. It's going to be a tough pill for us, but we need to do that. It's going to be, if we do it, it's going to mean we're going to have to rescind a lot of the policies that we have followed for the last, well, since 9/11. We need to become the shining city on the hill. If you think you live in the shining city on the hill, look around. I don't know how we can tell the rest of the world how they should live when we live with some of the things that are part and parcel of our lives. I have a lot of residual friendships from people overseas in countries where I've served, and I cannot tell you how many emails I've had from them saying, don't mean to be rude, but what's going on in your country? And what does it mean for us? These are not joking letters. These are very serious queries. People don't have any idea what really is going on. And it's very upsetting. No, I know. Okay. Finally, financially, we're in the soup. What do we owe? $19 trillion? And how are we going to pay that? And how can we afford to incur further debt? Because none of these activities come free. They all cost money. At a time when our infrastructure is falling apart, and where if we spend money on counterterrorism, it ought to be here in this country, against the things that are going on here, where we have some hope of being successful. And I would say in that context, I am an absolute believer in the concept of MI6, the British MI5, which is their internal security service. They are an intelligence organization without the powers of arrest. And they are the ones who run all of the counter-terrorist operations in Britain. And I wish to hell we had something like that here. We don't. We have nobody in this country who knows what a clandestine operation is. I mean, who's involved in counter-terrorist operations in the United States. The FBI is one of the best, what is the word I want? Law enforcement organizations in the world. I've worked with them on in every tour I've had. Every time I've been in the States, I've worked with them. One of my jobs was running a very big station in the United States, and we did it with the FBI because we couldn't do a lot of things that they could do. And boy, on law enforcement, you never find anybody better. On the kinds of things that intelligence officers do, it's just not in their DNA. You know? They get their points by putting people in jail, and we get our points by keeping them out of jail and keeping them telling us what's going on. So at any rate, I'd like to see that happen. I don't think I will. It was discussed during the hearings on 9/11 and rejected. The FBI didn't want it to happen. I don't know whether Homeland Security has any notion of what a clandestine operation is or not. Absolutely no idea. They certainly haven't helped me any getting on airplanes. But anyway, that's about it, folks. I would be happy to go anywhere you want to go on this. Questions? Why don't we start right back there?
I don't know if you can hear me.
I can.
Okay.
There is a microphone that somebody was going to pass around.
Here, I think it's just the crowd is too densely packed to use this. If you could stand up and talk loud.
I'll do my best. I do a facilitated dialogue with college students, two of whom are in Pakistan, one is in Jordan, one is in Italy, and the others are in the United States. It's an online dialogue. We meet weekly. And one of we are beginning to get into all of these issues of differences and similarities and questions that they have for one another. And terrorism, of course, is going to come up as a topic that they want to talk about. And, of course, the Muslim students are going to say we're not all terrorists, and the American students are going to respond. And we haven't had that conversation yet, but part of what we try to develop in the conversation with these young people is what is their sense of the future? What is it that they can become empowered to do on their own behalf and for their countries? And they are deeply devoted to their countries, to their cultures, to the education that they're getting. And I guess I'm a little bit at a loss of how to help facilitate that conversation because I'm not a Pakistani student. We've had students from other places in the middle, UAE and other places. This program isn't into Yemen yet and some of the other really, really war-torn places, or Afghanistan.
How do you think I can help you?
I don't know if you have, in your conversations with people, a sense of what's happening with the youth. Is it, and they're not, when we asked them last semester, what is your sense of the future, they didn't have one. Even the ones in this country didn't. Even the American students. And we said, what do you think?
I think, let me go about this. Everybody who didn't know anything about the Middle East, or who came there when I was there, they were all prone to say, these people all hate us. Well, the fact is they don't hate us. They really admire, particularly Americans. They have soft spots for Americans. What they hate is what we do. And if we could get that through our thick skulls, that it's what we're doing that's getting people upset, then maybe that should lead us into what we might do to make things better. Now, I can't answer all these questions that you have. I mean, there's no way in the world. But what you need to know is what they want. We've never given a damn about what they wanted. It's always been about what we want. We want them to be a democratic country. Yeah. Yes.
Two things. The first, who formulates our foreign policy? Because if we're listening today, intelligence officer, generally everything what you're saying contradicts to what our foreign policy in the last 20 years was. I'm a college professor. When I was told about Iraq campaign, I laughed. Because, well, I cried and laughed because I knew how much tragedy would come out of it, and I laughed about the story that we're going to build democracy there. Because if you ask anybody who is a little bit familiar with Islam, and promised to build democracy in 2-3 years using our armed forces was a joke. So the question is, if intelligent officers understand what you were saying, and academia understand who is forming our foreign policy, which is so clear.
Well, foreign policy in the United States is a result of a political process. And you have the same facts, realities in the formulation of foreign policy that you have in the decision to keep sugar cheap or make something else expensive. It's all what's in it for the guy who's going to have to vote for it. What's in it for the president who's going to have to get run on his foreign policy in his attempt to get reelected. So foreign policy is rarely, if ever, and this hit me it took me to Beirut before I realized this. Foreign policy is rarely based on the realities that exist in the country where it's going to be implemented. That's my own personal experience with it. No, it's not. It's a foreign policy built on the needs of the political elites in this country.
And money.
I'm sorry?
Money.
And, well, yeah, to a lesser extent.
And one more question. I agree on many statements that you made. I agree with many things that you stated about Islam, except one thing.
Okay.
I believe there are many Islams. And in particular, what I'm worried about, and I wanted your opinion, it is Salafism. Wahhabism, Salafism, and all these isms. And when you are saying that we should support regimes in the region, I agree with one exception. I would be very careful with Saudi Arabia. Because that's where the source of Salafism, and that's where all the troubles often associated.
Okay, fair enough. I won't argue that point with you. Right now, our relations with Saudi Arabia are not going well. They're going rather badly. We evolved our relationship with Saudi Arabia on the basis of one thing. Right, oil. And guess what? It's no longer valid. We don't need it. And what's happening is that the political elite in this country are beginning to see that it's maybe not as important as they thought it was. Now, you're absolutely right. Saudi Arabia was look, what was it, 18 of the hijackers on 9/11 were Saudis. They are the home to Salafism and Wahhabism, which are two of the most fundamentalist views of Islam. They have continued individually to fund terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda and ISIS. So, yes, yeah, no question, Nusrat, same thing. And there you are. I agree with you. I think they begin to lose a lot of power as the importance of their one commodity goes down. I don't know that, but I think that's what's happening. I think it's beginning to happen now. Way in the back.
Yeah, following on this, what you just said, briefly, earlier you said we have to pay more attention to it. You gave a list of countries, Egypt, Abu Dhabi. How about Iran?
Well, you see, in what respect? We're paying a lot of attention to them right now. We've just signed a major piece of a major treaty with them.
I've always wondered why we didn't cozy up to Iran rather than Saudi Arabia.
After the coup, what was it, in '79, it was politically impossible for any politician in this country to say anything nice about Saudi. They had over 400 of our people locked up in that damn embassy. Now, how do you stand up and say something I'm sorry?
How did Nixon go to China? It's always possible.
Well, China, yeah, okay. All right. It's China. Okay, point taken. Yes, and back.
Yeah, real quick, my question would be, do you feel, as you mentioned at the beginning of your talk about how the Western nations came into play as far as the administration of the region, now let's rewind back to 1923 when the Ottoman Empire got dissolved. Do you feel we would be in this situation today had we not have broken up the Ottoman Empire, or we would have found a more graceful way of dissolving that government?
Well, that's a very complicated question. The first part I would answer is that the Ottoman Empire had to. It was falling apart anyway, but it had to break up, and so that was a fact of life. How it was reassembled was the issue that has caused many of the problems that we have today. How it was put back together by the British and the Italians and the French. What did they do? Well, they did what they wanted to make it serve their needs. So in that respect, yeah, I think it was inevitable what happened with them. Now, if you want to be really uptight about this, take a look at what's going on in Turkey right now. And if you think that's a stable, comfortable, Western-oriented place, look out, because the Quran is coming back into favor, as are the Hadith and Sharia law. And there are major movements within the population of that country that want to reestablish the old values as the underpinnings of the country. So there it goes in that direction. Yes, sir.
I lived in Istanbul for 1 year, and I just got back from Egypt a month ago. And I don't agree with you whatsoever.
I'm sure you don't.
The current condition of Turkey. I mean, President Erdogan is conservative. He has conservative leanings, but half the population, if not more, are Kemalist. So they follow Atatürk, the guy who founded the republic. So I don't agree with you whatsoever.
You just said half the population.
Yeah, but half the population is Republican, half the population is Democrat. That doesn't mean half the population is the exact converse. That doesn't mean that they're fundamentalists that are interested in Wahhabism. I mean, if you can sit down to dinner and pray with Muslims the exact same way that a Christian can. Like you can sit in the pew, instead of a pew they have street carpet, you can do namaz with them. It's the exact same process.
See, when I came back from the Middle East, I felt exactly the same way that you do. Exactly the same way.
Broad, general strokes. Like
Yeah.
What Middle East do you exactly mean?
I'm sorry?
I was kind of disappointed at the beginning of your lecture. You painted everything in very generalized terms.
Yes?
I mean, what Middle East do you mean? What Islam do you exactly mean? Do you mean the Middle East and Morocco, where actually the Arabic that they speak, they can't even understand? Most of the Arabic speaking they can't understand. Do you mean Turkey?
You made your point.
I'm just
your
curious.
point is perfectly valid. You can't talk on this subject without generalizing. Yeah? You just can't do it.
You literally said at the beginning of your lecture that by virtue of being a Muslim, you are an extremist in your beliefs. But that's just not true.
I didn't say extremist. I said you're a fundamentalist. If you believe in the tenets in the basic organs of Islam, you are by nature a fundamentalist. You believe. Yes, of course it is.
But I just don't understand.
What's so hard to understand?
The vast majority of people in the Middle East don't work on.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you.
Sorry, the vast majority of people in the Middle East, they don't work on that basis.
That's true. They don't. But more and more of them do every day. They react to the provocations that we make in the Middle East. They react to our activities in the Middle East. They react to our view of their people.
I don't want to wrongly interpret what you said. It's just, I think that the base of the problem, for most of the problems in the Middle East, is an economic one. It's not a religious one. It's an economic one. It's a matter of education and money. I think a lot of the problems are because they don't have enough opportunities, because of the after effects of the colonial powers, like you said yourself in about the middle of your lecture. I think it's really unfair to talk about a religion being the impetus or the main force behind violent acts. Because wildly I don't think
Well, look, you know, you're a purist, and you know, I'm sorry, I can't really deal with the niceties of what you're saying. But if you're looking at Islam as any kind of threat to us, you have to look at it that way. You don't have any choice, because there are parts of Islam that are absolutely fit into that pattern, and you know it as well as I do. And there are more and more of them all the time. And I'm sorry?
it feels very analogous to the communist scare, the current mood in America, the Islamophobia. Like, I don't think one necessitates the other. I don't think that there's a one-to-one connection. Like communism, the people had negative feelings, negative connotations with communism. They thought that communism necessitated that Soviet state. But I think that there's a lot of details in between A and B. It's not so simple to say this causes that.
Look, you're talking about sitting down and writing 3, 4, 5 theses. I'm standing up here for an hour. Give me a break. Next, yes.
I just wanted you to clarify, because my ears kind of perked up. You said that we're not allowed to go and recruit like a Muslim that might be living in the community.
We're not allowed to target them.
Oh, but why? Who said?
Because it's not politically correct.
Okay, because now you said MI5, they would be able to do that, like go out.
They have totally different rules in England.
Oh, okay, that's what I wanted to know. Is that?
Ours here? Yes, please.
Supposing the next president said, all right, we are clearing out the Middle East. 110% gone. What would happen? Anything?
I'm sure something would happen, yeah.
What do you think would happen? I mean, is there any negative to that?
Oh, sure.
What?
Well, for openers, without any kind of oversight, all of the tribal, sectarian, and national frictions come out and can act out. So you stand a really good chance of having major conflicts all over the place.
But didn't you recommend more localized governments to begin with? Or so what would
No, I didn't recommend localized government. I said that it's very hard to see in those countries much hope for centralized government. Okay? Yes?
So, given her idea that America just plain comes home, is it possible they would have civil war between themselves?
Possible. Sure, it's possible. Yeah. Yeah, they do right now in many places, yeah. Yeah.
Then it would just be themselves. Or whoever else Russia.
Yes, sir.
I agree with almost everything you said.
Oh, my God. Will you protect me when I walk out from that guy?
10 years of labor, I received a PhD in Islamic and Middle Eastern Area Studies at Princeton in 1961. My professors knew very well what was going on. Then I worked at the University of Michigan. Those guys, including me, knew what was going on. Then I went to Harvard. Those guys know what's going on.
Of course they do.
I was always involved throughout my career with the expansion of Middle Eastern studies in American universities. We have at least 26 centers of Middle East studies. When I retired, there may be more. Why aren't those guys we trained having an influence on American policy?
Because American policy, by and large, is not based on the objective facts in the area where it's going to be implemented. Sorry. Yes, in the back.
Yes. I have a couple of questions. One is the initial point that you made in terms of America selling its democracy. They also, over the years, have supported dictatorships, using communism as an example. And when Bush and Cheney got into office, there was a memo immediately to Blair to somehow get rid of the ruler of Iraq. Okay? So this was before 9/11. So we have had our agenda, and so have the English. And the ones who are fighting in ISIS have their own agenda. They want power as well. It's like the tribal rivalry. They all want territory. They all want to be important. The problem is the way they do it. And I disagree with your opinion of MI5 because the thing is, not only with MI6 and MI5, not only was it Philby and Blunt, but when we were in England working in England in '76, we feared every day for our lives. The IRA were blowing up buildings, blowing up subways.
What does this have to do with the question at hand?
It's people wanting power. I'm sure there are people who want peace, who want to live normally.
I agree with you. Power runs most of the world.
Yes.
Okay. I'm not going to dissent on that. Let me tell you an interesting sidelight. Lawrence Wilkerson, who was Colin Powell's aide for much of his military career and his entire time in the State Department, has said recently that during the Cold War, the United States government supported the fundamentalist Muslim groups in the Middle East. Unintended consequences. Way in the back.
You said what you'd like to see happen going forward.
I said what might happen. Could happen.
You said that it would be best if we were to pull back.
Fair enough.
And not meet the agenda that the jihadists have by provoking and creating more alliances for them. What do you think is actually going to happen given the divisive political climate in this country and the need to make foreign policy decisions that's based upon that divisive political climate?
Well, this is very, very difficult for me because I am by nature a New England Republican. And of course, we don't exist anymore. So it's hard for me to fit in. But I'm not quite sure how to answer this. What was the root of the question again?
I don't know what's going to happen. And I'm wondering if you have any ideas than I do about where we're going, because
what's going to
I don't have a clue.
What's going to happen is the same old way of formulating foreign policy is going to continue to exist, I fear. And I will say here, even with my own background, that I think the only president that we've had in recent times who's been even close to the mark is the one we've got right now. And I will bet you money over time that that history is very, very kind to him. And I think his view of the way you should be forming policy deliberately and carefully and unemotionally is probably the strongest hand I've seen. And of course, it is threatened by people of my ilk as being wishy-washy, not knowing what it wants to do. I think that's wrong. And I think if we had more deliberation by people who better understood the realities in the region, that we'd probably be better off. Yes, please.
You mentioned the role that corporations might be playing in our intervention in the Middle East.
Well, I think if we were to withdraw our military attention from the Middle East, I would say we would have to get as heavily involved politically, economically, and as we possibly can. I mean, we can't just withdraw from the Middle East. We have to. That's why I end with the shining city on the hill, which is a bit of a misnomer, but that basic concept of letting people look at you if you're worth looking at, and I'm not sure we are right now, but if you're worth looking at, let them look at you and pick things that they like about what you're doing, rather than telling them what they ought to be doing. So I think that would be augmented by corporate activity, by economic activity as well as political. And I know what you're going to say. Can you trust the corporations to be on the up?
Yeah,
you work
the
with
defense money is being spent, and the wealth is coming to our country for that. A few. Mm-hmm. How do you handle that?
Well, they do in many respects. They're very instrumental in foreign policy. Yeah, no question about it. Yes.
So, for young professionals going forward who want to get into this field, do you have any advice or
You and I will talk later. Okay? In the back.
So a specific question, was it a mistake to overthrow Gaddafi?
Oh, absolutely.
Was a mistake.
Oh, Lord, look at what's happened to the world since we did that. I really believe that the decision to invade Iraq will remain the most critically. Where? Oh, Libya. Oh, I'm sorry. I was in Iraq. Yes, I think it was a mistake. I absolutely think it was, which is one of the reasons I have such concerns about Mrs. Clinton, who was really instrumental in that whole process. Yeah. Do you know that it's fascinating? There are 140 tribes and tribal organizations in Libya. 140. And they all hate each other.
They couldn't get out? I mean,
No, it's because basically you have people who want to live reasonable lives, who are in conflict with other people, and they group together. A tribe is a defensive group of people looking out for their own interests. And that's why they exist. And that's why they've existed since the beginning of time. Tribes got together to keep the goddamn lions out of their houses, you know?
American
Absolutely. Yes.
You said that your colleagues from your earlier time all over the world, that they admire some things about the United States. I think that's what you
No, I said that natives around the world admire Arabs.
They hate what we do, but they admire some things.
Absolutely, yes.
Can you name a couple of
Yes. Did you watch the Tahrir events? What was it, 5-6 years ago? Well, I think if you talk to the average guy on the street in the Tahrir Square who was against the government, what he would have said was how much he liked. Oh God, what's this coffee place that we have? Starbucks. How much he liked Starbucks. How much he admired Starbucks. No, that's a flip answer. But we do a lot of things right, despite the fact that we do a lot of things wrong. And everywhere I've been over there, because of my languages, I've gravitated into groups of locals who studied abroad, worked abroad, lived abroad. And that's the group that I'm talking about there, that has the basically favorable notion of a lot of us and things that we represent, who really don't like what we do. Yeah. Please.
I got a question.
Yes.
I got a question. It kind of pertains to whether or not you know about the Rothschild family. Do you know who they are?
They're rich.
Really rich.
Well, I'm not so sure we're on the. Go ahead. Give it a try, what the hell.
There's this conspiracy. Conspiracy, and well, they kind of own all the central banking systems for most countries, right? And after 2001, they kind of moved in onto some of the countries that they don't have centralized banking in, and that, like Libya and Afghan. And this was after the U.S. kind of moved in, and infiltrated them and started establishing a government, democracy, like you said. I was just wondering if you kind of know if you think, or like if you think the Rothschild family or somebody like the Rothschild family is just trying to make money off this whole deal of the U.S. going in and trying to establish a democracy.
I don't believe in any conspiracy theories.
But they've done
Any.
They've done it before, sir.
Yeah, sure. Of course they are. You know, one of the reasons that we have rules is that people are basically dishonest across the board. And they're out to make a buck, and they're out to beat the system, and they're out to cheat. And so you have to have rules, which is why I'm so concerned about the Republicans right now who don't want any rules at all. But sure, they're going to do that. A certain portion of the population is going to be into no good, or up to no good.
So you think that somebody
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. I said it certainly is possible, but I have absolutely no information to tell me that's true. And you know, did you read it on the internet? Because you can't believe everything you read on it.
The microphone thing is a big blessing. Other questions? I'll try to get this to you if there are.
Wait, no, in the back. Go in the back. You've had a shot or two.
I was struck by your comments about privacy and about how you value getting in the mind of other people to understand what they're thinking as a strategy around intelligence. However, we live in an age of a vast electronic intelligence gathering.
Yep.
What's your take on that, up to and including the battle with Apple around the iPhone encryption and the technologies available now worldwide to encrypt messaging?
Well, I can tell you only that I came down personally entirely on Apple's side on that issue that they had with the FBI, and I continue to believe that was appropriate. And in fact, the FBI went off, as I said they would, and found another way to solve their problem. The Israelis did it for them, or whatever it was. So yeah, in that respect, I don't really. You see, it was that guy from Dartmouth, Webster. Daniel Webster said, "Those who are prepared to give up their liberties for a little bit of security deserve neither." And I am a 100% advocate of that point of view. And we get all upset when some crazy major kills 14 people in Fort Hood, Texas. And we are the people who kill 250,000 people a year on our roads. And there's something out of whack there. You know, why aren't people really upset with cars? You know? So I think that we're, and I agree with you that there really aren't any secrets. I look at Facebook at my own grandchildren. Jesus. I mean, seriously, the stuff that they put down about themselves, it's no wonder anybody ever hire them. But that's the way it is, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know the answer to the question. I don't think this country as a whole knows what the answer to that problem, to this question is. I think part of it will prove to be that people become, how shall I put it, more used to this reality and less afraid of it. And that it will become, the lack of privacy will become a more common factor in our lives. I think that's one of the results you can expect. But other than that, I don't know what to say. Well, thank you very much. You've been fine. Thank you. Thank you.